I mean, the more you look at this, the more absolutely absurd it becomes. I think, ladies and gentlemen, the world has turned into the largest insane asylum in the universe, and we're all competing to see who can be the nuttiest. Don't go away. I remember as a small boy.
All right. Well, with this one, I'm going to use this story about the quote-unquote Chinese weather spy balloon satellite thingy, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so pretty much what I'm going to say before I go into all of this is, if you have ever in your life thought that I would ever in my life care about any judgment that you would make upon me whatsoever, please know that I don't care at all, and that I never will care whatsoever in any way about any negative judgment you could ever have upon me. And you know why the reason for that is? Well, it's pretty simple. It's because I know infinitely more than you do, and I always will, and you pretty much will never even come close to understanding what I know, because mainly you refuse to put the time in to do the research on this. Like, just on this topic alone, there's 13 hours of video to go through. Just disarmament alone. The Open Skies Treaty that I'm about to discuss is the very end of the research that you would get to. So it's pretty much like a misnomer almost. Or no, that's the wrong word. It's pretty much like a footnote to the whole story of disarmament. So if you don't already know about the Open Skies Treaty, that means you don't know anything whatsoever about disarmament agreements that have been foisted upon the world by the various nations of the world. Which basically, in a nutshell, if you know what I know, which you don't, and you never will because you don't have the time to do the study to prove any of this, because I've already given it to you and all you do is ignore it. I've given it for a decade now, and every person I've ever given it to has ignored it and then claimed intellectual superiority despite me providing them with simple research that would enlighten them to the world in a way they don't otherwise understand and never will, like I already understand. So, like, when you judge me on this, please know I don't give a shit. Actually, when you judge me on anything whatsoever, please know I don't give a shit. Because if you don't understand these disarmament agreements that I'm about to discuss here, you have no geopolitical understanding whatsoever of the world around you. You simply don't know anything whatsoever. And if you were to judge me in a positive light, it would actually be an embarrassment to my name and my honor before God, because you simply haven't done the research that is to be expected of you as the incredible human being that you could be, but you decide to skip over being, and then judge other people who decide to do incredible things, like learn things that make sense of the world, such as learning about disarmament treaties between the various nations, which make the entirety of political, economic, and physical warfare completely meaningless on the world stage. That means every single world event you have ever followed is meaningless because you don't understand very basic disarmament agreements.
Every day, every night, aircraft of the former Soviet Union are overflying the United States on a regular and continuing basis. Military bombers, military logistics aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft, and, of course, passenger aircraft. Interesting? I would say yes. The treaty establishes an Open Skies Consultative Commission, which will meet in Vienna to monitor the operation of the treaty and to discuss and resolve any problems which may arise. The treaty is of unlimited duration and provides for periodic review conferences. For the United States, the On-Site Inspection Agency, OSIA, will be responsible for conducting and receiving Open Skies flights in coordination with the Department of Defense and other relevant agencies. For those of you who doubt that they're overflying the United States, they not only overfly the United States, but have landed at many major airports across the country. And yes, Soviet bombers have been part of those aircraft which have landed at American airfields. Open Skies is not a system for gathering detailed technical intelligence, but it will enable countries to collect basic information on the military capabilities and activities of other countries, thereby enhancing mutual security and confidence. They used to call that spying, ladies and gentlemen, and they used to say that it was not in the best interest of the national security to have another country monitoring our military defense capability.
To the United Nations, all set up long before you were even born, which guarantee you up living as a slave to the United Nations under a despotic, totalitarian, communist rule. It's already on paper. I can easily document this. Now, the reason I'm having to use this silly balloon gate thing as a jumping off point for this, well, I don't know. All I can say is thank God he gave me the opportunity and the idea to put it in your heads. Okay, so with this entire balloon gate nonsense, you're able to expose 4 things for the average person that they otherwise have no comprehension of whatsoever. The first one of these is that Balloon Gate itself is a jumping off point for a huge variety of geopolitical issues that you have no understanding of whatsoever. There's a ton of different laws passed over the past 75 years with the United Nations between all the various nations of the world, which you don't understand. And this balloon thing and the open skies treaties that go along with it, which make it totally irrelevant as a news story. Well, like I said, this is a good jumping off point. So the second point here is, I'm going to use this balloon gate thing to prove to you that the United States military, as well as the United States sovereignty as a nation, was signed over to the United Nations in 1945 with the signing of the United Nations Participation Act. I believe that was Truman that signed that into law. And then the third one here is also on top of all of this, with the understanding that you have with the open skies treaties and how they've been implemented despite being unconstitutional, well, this is a jumping off point to proving that our courts all the way up to the Supreme Court, and including the Supreme Court, so every district court that you've all been worried about with all these recent political rulings on things like elections and whatnot, we all know about all these various courts. Well, here's the thing. They have been instructed long ago to completely ignore the U.S. Constitution in regards to all matters. And they have also agreed to place the UN Charter. The UN Charter, it's a pretty simple read. I think it's like 32 pages or 33 pages. The UN Charter is the supreme article of law in the United States and has been since 1945. And all of our judges have been operating on this basic truth as a matter of their judicial, everything that in regards to their job, in regards to justice, has been predicated on the fact that the United Nations Charter is the supreme article of law and has been in the United States since 1945. If you don't know this and you want to disagree with this, you're arguing against a concrete fact that cannot be disproven. And if you actually want to argue that the United States has the U.S. Constitution as its supreme article of law, or has at any point in the last 75 years, well, then that just proves that your entire geopolitical understanding of the world is invalid, and your entire understanding of recent U.S. history is invalid and has no place in reality whatsoever. You have been bamboozled and brainwashed into an understanding of history that is not so. Okay, so the fourth thing that this exposes is that the Soviet Union, not only did it not fold and collapse, never went away, never, none of that stuff ever happened, it also was never an enemy to begin with, in that everything that we have from a technological standpoint to build war machines, we gave to them before any and all war efforts.
It is explicitly a general-purpose observation system and is not tied to any arms control agreement. If it's not tied to an arms control agreement, what is the purpose other than to destroy the defense of the United States of America? Long ago, we grounded all of our B-52 alert force. We disbanded the Strategic Air Command. We are vulnerable. Extremely vulnerable, I might add. Participating countries may, of course, seek information through open skies which would be relevant to arms control agreements to which they are parties. Raw data obtained from observation flights, for example, film, negatives, and magnetic tape, will be shared by the observing and observed countries. Oh, isn't that nice? They fly over our nation, spy on us, take photographs, magnetic tapes, and then they turn around and give us copies so that we'll know what we already have. That's nice. That's very big of them. Other countries participating in the Open Skies Treaty will be able to purchase copies of data in which they are interested from the observing country. Individual countries are responsible for their own analysis of the raw data.
Endless various mainstream news, political clippings that you can take endlessly for days. A lot of this is taken from the treason documents itself, which is 700 pages of documents taken out of everything I just said, the congressional records, State Department documents. I can name all of these off memory off the top of my head. The main ones you're going to want to look into are Public Law 87-297, signed into law by JFK in 1961. There's also Public Law 101-216. That's Public Law 101-216, signed into law by the eldest Bush, Bush Sr., in 1989. It was either May or December of 1989. And then there's State Department document 7277. All you got to do is Google State Department document.
And now they're telling us this would not pose an unmanageable security risk within the United States itself if every nation in the world can overfly our airspace anytime they want to. These people sure make a lot of sense, don't they? So when were they lying? Before or now? I think they've always been lying. Third, the treaty dramatically advances the tools available for confidence building. Yes, I think the Russians are going to be very confident now that they can overfly our country and take photographs they've never been able to take before, even with their wonderful satellites. Because their satellites have never been so wonderful, folks. That was a big scam. You see, the Soviet Union was never even able to produce even the most rudimentary computer chip. Therefore, their technology has always been in the Dark Ages. Did you know that? Did you know that? Over the past 2 decades, the array of confidence-building measures has expanded steadily. Now the Open Skies Treaty adds to this toolkit detailed procedures for aerial observation with agreed sensors, predetermined quotas, and no right of refusal. No right of refusal. No right of refusal. Which means even if we wanted to, we can't tell them to get out of our airspace and go home and stop overflying the United States according to the terms of the treaty. It also establishes a new framework for contacts, cooperation, and consultation among participating states. Fourth, the treaty establishes a major precedent which may prove particularly useful in other parts of the world beyond the original signatories in reducing tensions, contributing to greater mutual understanding, and reinforcing regional peace and security. Other nations outside the Europe-Atlantic area, where the treaty was negotiated, have already expressed interest in the treaty. That's right, folks. Bimini will be sending overflights. Mr. Chairman, I would like to describe the principal provisions of the Open Skies Treaty relating to participation.
So the first thing that you need to understand when you hear about these treaties that are made between the United States and the United Nations is that, okay, in regards to this Open Skies Treaty, there is some language in the treaty itself that makes it sound as if the United States has some power in this regards. But what you need to remember about all of this is that everything in regards to this treason against the United States, that involves the United Nations and the military disarmament of the world, it, it's all led, and the Soviet Union negotiated the fact that they would place at the head of the United Nations military. There would always be a Soviet officer. So basically, the the entire military force of the United Nations has been and always will be run by a communist agent of the former Soviet Union. They've branched out in recent years. Like, you can look at this if you look up I think it's the Undersecretary of Political Affairs is the UN military head position. It's basically on par with the UN president, which I forget what that's called offhand as well. But the recent ones have all been non-Soviet agents. So, like, up until from 1945 up until the so-called collapse of the Soviet Union, and even after, there was generally a Russian placed in as the head agent of the United Nations military. But after the quote-unquote collapse of the Soviet Union, they've gone with people from other nations. Like, recently they had Ban Ki-moon as the UN president. I think there was an Ethiopian that was in charge of the United Nations military forces. So when you hear about all of these treaties, you need to realize that the enemies of the United States itself are the ones heading up the military that's the enforcement agent of these various treaties that we're talking about here. So, like, any of these treaties that seem to be fair to the United States, they are in no way and never will be fair to the United States, because there's other backdoors and other safety measures built into these disarmament campaigns that allow for only the United States to be disarmed and nobody else. Well, it's not so much that, but it's the focus is on the United States disarmament and taking the United States down as a military power. So, like, when we get into all this, there is basically no reason to overfly anybody else's. Anybody else, like, when they're using this Open Skies Treaty to spy on the United States, and that's actually what I'm forgetting to go into, is this entire idea that this weather balloon itself is some sort of a dangerous spy agent to the United States is utterly absurd, because the Open Skies Treaty proves that every nation on Earth has had the ability to overfly the skies of the United States with impunity. And not only that, we actually have to pay for their spy flights over the United States. So any person whatsoever who is worked up over a so-called spy balloon thing from China or whatever, I don't even know what they're calling this, to be honest with you. I haven't paid any attention to it whatsoever, because it's meaningless, because they've already been spying on the United States with flights over our heads by the hour. They've been flying flights hourly over the United States, overseeing all of our military capacities as well as the disarmament of our military. The reason for the flights itself is to monitor the disarmament of the United States military to the United Nations. So, like, when you get into this huff about a spy balloon being over Montana or something, it doesn't mean anything, because in secret, well, it's not even in secret, it's an Open Skies Treaty. It's a very open treaty. I have all the documentation for you. Anybody who says I don't have the documentation to prove this is a fear-mongering liar who does not want you to know the truth about the world. That's all there is to say about the matter. But so when you get into all of these treaties that seem to be fair and whatever, they're not. There's always a communist agent behind the scenes running the show that ensures that the United States will be taken down and other nations will be propped up as the power heads of the United Nations. Pretty simple stuff. It should be taught at the high school or even the junior high level. It's really not that difficult to understand any of this, but somehow it's such a mystery that when there's a stupid hoax spy balloon or whatever floating over Montana, everybody freaks out as if there's not already spy flights completely dismantling our sovereignty as a nation. And this has been going on since a good majority of you have been born. It's been going on since before I was born, and I'm 33. So, like, anybody that doesn't know about this has utterly no excuse in the world to be worried about some kind of spy balloon. That just means you haven't been properly educated at any point in your life whatsoever.
Coverage. The Open Skies Treaty provides that all of the territory of participating states must be open to observation. No exceptions are permitted for national security purposes. Observation flights will follow routes set up by the observing party. Only modifications for legitimate reasons of flight safety may be proposed. The question of full territorial access was debated within the U.S. government when the initial Open Skies proposal was developed. At that time, a decision was made that full access was essential to the political and confidence-building objectives of the proposal, and that such access could be provided in the United States consistent with national security, given the previous restrictions in force in the former Soviet Union. This requirement for full territorial access was perhaps the subject most intensely debated in the negotiation. Agreement was only reached in the fall of 1991, following the abortive Moscow coup of August 1991. The treaty text not only affirms the principle of full territorial access, but also spells out how this is to be implemented effectively in actual aerial operations. The treaty does this with detailed provisions on the formulation of the flight plan to ensure that the observation objectives of the observing party will be achieved. That means, ladies and gentlemen, if the Soviet Union, or what used to be the Soviet Union, if Russia wants to photograph a specific top-secret military target within the United States, that we are to help them with the formulation of the flight plan to ensure that the observation objectives of the observing party will be achieved. But you just try walking anywhere near it. See how fast you get arrested. So who is it being kept secret from? Not the Russians. Not the Russians, folks. That never has been. Once the question of access was determined, the second factor shaping the quality and quantity of information which the participants could gather in Open Skies was...
First thing I have to say, before you even form any thoughts whatsoever on this, if you actually want to know what this is all about and what I'm talking about here, you've got to do a heck of a lot of research. There's 14 hours of just radio reading, of just documentation of this, just being read on the radio, and then there's hundreds of other pages of other documentation provided to you. You have to go through yourself to form an even greater understanding of all of this treason and disarmament of the United States that I'm basically the only person that knows about any of it.
Let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, in lieu of the fact that we have been overflying the Soviet Union for many, many years, beginning with the U-2 overflights, continuing with the SR-71 Blackbird, and of course whatever has taken its place, because they would never have taken it out of our aircraft complement unless there was something to replace it. Also, we have a vast array of spy satellites in orbit looking down upon the Soviet Union all the time. What is this Open Skies Treaty all about? Was it to give us access to the atmosphere over the Soviet Union? No, ladies and gentlemen, because we already had it and have always had it, and the only interruption was when they shot down Francis Gary Powers and his U-2 back during the Eisenhower administration. No SR-71 has ever been shot down, nor has any SR-71 flight ever been interdicted, nor have any of our spy satellites been interdicted, shot down, destroyed, or knocked out of orbit. So what is this all about? Very simply, ladies and gentlemen, it allows the Soviet Union, or what used to be the Soviet Union, what's left of the Soviet Union, which still has the entire military might intact, to overfly the airspace of the United States of America, which never was permitted before. And that's the truth of the matter. Several people.
Now, for any of you who might be offended by the fact that I have absolutely abhorred anybody who has participated in any military conflict whatsoever at any point in the last 70 years, and that includes World War II, because every military conflict in the world has been one giant scam. And if you have a problem with me judging you for that and judging you for your involvement in all of this nonsense, which has stripped us all of our rights and left us all living as slaves, well, I don't really care, because that's the first thing that you got mad at in the first place. That blinded you and made your ego come to light in such great fashion that it blinded you entirely from seeing a very basic reality, such as that the United States has already agreed to disarm itself militarily, and you can't have a sovereign nation if you do not have a military. And also, on top of this, we have the documentation to prove what the alternative is going to be. It's not like getting rid of the United States Constitution is going to be ambiguous and drawn out by us in the end and replaced with something better. No. All this fighting that's been done on behalf of the United States since World War II, well, it's all been done in vain, because it's all been done to install a world government that is defined by socialism, and we had the documentation to prove it. The United Nations Charter itself was written by an avowed communist. Oh man, I'm forgetting who wrote it now. Well, the guy. Oh, it was Alger Hiss that wrote the United Nations Charter. And if you actually dig into the United Nations Charter, it's essentially identical to the Soviet Constitution of like 1929 or something like that. So like, the worst the Soviet Union had ever been in its history, that is what the United Nations Charter has been based upon. So essentially what that means is that if you've fought in any military conflict on either side for any country in the world over the past 75 years since the end of World War II, that means that you've been fighting to install a socialist world government in which there are no nation states, in which is no national sovereignty, and in which the outlining of rights has already been denied to all peoples of all races and colors and creeds. No religion will be allowed under the United Nations Charter, and that's kind of just a basic starting outline of the United Nations Charter. There actually is a bunch of garbage written in the UN Charter where it claims to guarantee everybody human rights, but then there's a byline like 3/4 of the way through it that reads, "Oh, except for we get to take your rights away whenever it's good for the security of the UN one world state." So like, yeah, there's nothing there whatsoever that you can even remotely compare to freedom. So if you've been fighting or defending anybody who has quote unquote fought for your rights, well, they never have. And if you have ever judged me in the past, because I know a lot of you have, most of the people that I've introduced this topic to hate my guts and want to stomp my guts in after my dead body is already burned and charred and feathered and all kinds of stuff, just because I told them their significant other's military service was completely meaningless, and he was fighting on behalf of a world government that is evil and wants to enslave you. So, like, if you're one of these people who has ever gotten angry at me or who to this day wants to fight me, please come do it. But if you're one of these people, please come fight me, actually, by the way. If you ever want to fight me, just come fight me. I don't give a fuck. But, okay, so if you're one of these people that got really mad at all the stuff I've told you about how your grandpa's military service was meaningless and he was really fighting for evil, well, to be honest with you, I don't give a fuck, because you're ignorant. And everything I'm going to be bringing to light here and in the coming months is going to prove it to you if you listen to any of it, which you probably won't, because you're probably going to be afraid to listen to it. But, hey, I'm going to put it out anyway, so we'll fucking see.
When are you going to wake up? How long is it going to take? How many of us have to risk our lives and take the brunt of the anger of these people to try to get you to stand up and accept the responsibility of your own role in all of this? How many Carolyn Nelsons have to start out in an old broken down car and weave her way across the country, handing out copies of the Constitution and being called a crazy old lady in the car over there before you all come to your senses? At what point in our history did patriotism become a dirty word and patriots become right-wing Aryan racists? How did all of that happen? And when is it going to stop? And what is going to be your role in it? And when am I going to stop hearing, I'm afraid to stand up, I'm afraid to say something, I'm afraid to write a letter because I might get on somebody's list? You're already on the list. There's one list. And if you're not one of them, you're one of us, and you are on that one list. And if you don't stand up with us and help fight this battle, and we lose this battle, you are going to be a slave in the New World Order. It's as simple as that. Nothing complicated about any of this, ladies and gentlemen. It is very simple. You either believe in what you've always professed to believe in, and you are willing to fight and die for those beliefs and ideals, or you have always been a hypocrite and a liar. Are you one who will not stand up now and help us fight this battle, but you patted your son on the ass and sent him off to the Middle East to die in the desert? Is that who you are? Are you one of the old war veterans who sits around in dark VFW halls drinking beer and telling lies? Or do you really love freedom? Do you really care about your children and your grandchildren? Or are you one of those who says, I don't have to get involved in this. By the time all this comes about, I'll be dead. Or my government retirement check is our only income, so I can't help. Or as many do, Mr. Cooper, in light of all that you've said tonight, what can I do to best protect my assets? I tell you now, ladies and gentlemen, you better start worrying about your ass more and about your assets less. Or you're going to be left with none of all of the above. What do you think about all of this? What are you willing to do to live free, to work free, to speak free, to think free, to marry free, to live where you want, to travel freely? Will be a major indirect beneficiary of this increase in knowledge, confidence, and security of the other participants. This, in fact, was one of the primary considerations behind the U.S. initiative in presenting the Open Skies idea and bringing the negotiations to a successful conclusion. All parties in Open Skies will have access to sensors of equal capabilities. And if they don't have, we'll give it to them. In the spring of 1990, the East European states obtained agreement from the United States and its NATO allies that all participants would have access to sensor capabilities equal to those employed by any other participant. Which means if Haiti wants to overfly the United States and the little committee gives them the go-ahead, we've got to give them the state-of-the-art in reconnaissance equipment in order to be able to fulfill their mission. Thank you, Pooh. My fan club is clapping in the background. All parties in Open Skies will have access to sensors of equal capabilities. This is insane. You see, folks, it would be insane if, in fact, we had an enemy anywhere. We really don't. The enemy is the people. And what's happening in the world is a great drama being played out to cause the people to ask for control on a global basis so that they can put together their one-world totalitarian socialist government without a civilian armed uprising. You see, this is quite all right, because the Soviet Union is not and never has been our ally. We built the Soviet Union. We gave them all of the technology we ever had. We gave them the atomic bomb. William Casey was the man instrumental in building for them the Kama River Truck Factory, which is the largest rolling stock mechanized factory in the entire world, which could produce more tanks, trucks, jeeps, and lorries than all of our combined manufacturing capability together in the United States of America. William Casey was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, amongst many other things, and was a member of the Sovereign and Military Order of the Knights of Malta. He was a member of the OSS and a Knights Templar. He did not die of a stroke, as you were told. William Casey, ladies and gentlemen, was not murdered, as many have proclaimed. William Casey was a man who, if called to testimony to Congress, would have told the truth. William Casey, as any good intelligence operative will tell you, committed suicide so that he would not have to do that, because he would have spilled the whole beans about all of this. Because irregardless of what he was working to bring about in the world, he believed that he was right in doing it, and he was a truthful man. He was passionate about doing away with war, and he really believed in his heart that one world government was the only way to do it. However, he failed to understand that no matter what they implement or put into place, it will still be imperfect men ruling imperfect men. It will still be greedy men with power in their hands and lust in their hearts, and of course, when they're operating from the Luciferian principle, it is not ameliorated by the principles of mercy or understanding. Nope, it is cold and cruel and intrepid, and comes strictly from a point of the intellect. There's no emotion involved, no compassion, no mercy, no heart, no love. That's what's wrong with all of these people. Ollie North was not the man that you think he is. All the time that he was operating behind the scenes, shredding the Constitution page by page, article by article, paragraph by paragraph, he was operating from a cold, calculating, cruel, intrepid point of intellect. It wasn't until he himself was caught and called upon the carpet of the Congress that he became initially emotionally motivated, and his voice began to crack, and he sounded like a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, screaming for understanding and sympathy, all the while wearing the uniform of men of the United States Marine Corps. Ollie North disgraced that uniform. He was in the process of shredding the Constitution, and his act in front of Congress was just that, an act and nothing more. He is in fact a traitor, but many of you have paid a lot of money into his pockets to go and listen to him talk about how he is a patriot. When are you going to wake up? When are you going to wake up? How long? What do you think about all of this? What are you willing to do to live free, to work free, to speak free, to think free, to marry free, to live where you want, to travel freely, to choose your own doctor, to choose your own income through your own efforts, your own work, with your own brain. I've seen people around this country who lost a job on an automobile assembly line where they put two bolts in a panel and tightened them down as the assembly line moved on to the next station. And their life was ruined. They complained that they were too old to retrain for another job. And we all owed them something. When they made it impossible for me to work because of what I am doing, I simply created my own job. When they told me I could never get on radio, I laughed, and here I am. When they told me I could never say these things, I did. And when they asked me, Bill, aren't you afraid? Aren't you scared? Don't you know they're going to come after you? I asked in return, where were you when you sent me to fight and die in Vietnam? Why weren't you concerned about whether I was scared then? Or whether I was afraid? Or whether the Viet Cong or the NVA was going to come after me? Why didn't you ask that of those you sent to fight and die in Desert Scam? You may know it as Desert Storm. Nevertheless, it is Desert Scam. The priorities of the American people are so mixed up and so screwed around and so corrupted. It will be a miracle if we can muster enough patriotic citizens to save a modicum of what we have left. And for those people, I will be here for you every night. Good night, and God bless you all.